Many energy firms are failing vulnerable customers, says the regulator Ofgem, as people face an expensive winter. It says 17 firms must improve. It found some householders have problems trying to get help from their supplier.
Some advisors were really good at helping vulnerable customers, others weren't. Now, what we don't want for someone who is in difficulties is to face potluck when they try and get in touch with their supplier.
It comes as 1,000 NHS patients will have their energy bills paid for on prescription this winter. We'll have more on a trial scheme that's being extended. Also this lunchtime. The Manston Centre in Kent, which holds asylum seekers who cross the Channel in small boats, has been cleared. The days of cheap labour must end, Keir Starmer tells Business. The Labour leader says the country needs to be weaned off its immigration dependency. Rescuers in Indonesia search rubble for survivors as the number of people killed in yesterday's earthquake rises to nearly 270. The King takes part in his first state visit as monarch as South Africa's president arrives in London. And there's a shock result in the World Cup as Saudi Arabia beat Argentina.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, England slumped to a one-day series defeat in Australia, beaten by 221 runs today in Melbourne.
Disturbed and very
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. 17 energy suppliers have been told they need to improve how they deal with vulnerable customers. The warning comes from the regulator Ofgem, which has been reviewing data supplied by the industry. All the firms that took part were criticised, with 5 found to have severe weaknesses. But some companies say the review was incomplete. Our cost of living correspondent Kevin Peachy has this report.
The nights are drawing in, the heating is going on and bills are rising. As costs increase, more and more people are struggling and vulnerable. But this is the response they're getting from suppliers.
What we generally found, I think across all suppliers, but particularly those with severe weaknesses, really is a sense of inconsistency. A sense that some advisors were really good at helping vulnerable customers, others weren't. Now, what we don't want for someone who is in difficulties is to face potluck when they try and get in touch with their supplier.
A typical household bill this winter is £2,500 a year, double that of last winter. In April, that typical annual bill will rise to £3,000. With many finding those bills difficult to pay, Ofgem says all firms need to improve. But 5 of them, Good Energy, Outfox, So Energy, True Energy and Utilita, had severe issues. Campaigners say those on top-up meters are in the most critical situation.
At Citizens Advice, we're hearing from many people who are struggling to top up their prepayment meters. Already this year, we've helped more people with that issue than we have in the previous past 5 years alone. We really hope today's report is a wake-up call because we need to know that energy companies will step in and support people who are really struggling with their costs.
Ofgem has called for urgent action from suppliers, but the most heavily criticised suppliers have called for clarity from Ofgem. They say they were condemned on incomplete evidence and that any improvements they've made haven't been reflected. And that, they say, is causing extra unnecessary concern for vulnerable customers. Help is available, but with some of those most in need already choosing not to top up their meters because of their debts, and in one case, an elderly man left without power for a fortnight, it won't take much to send stress levels as well as bills soaring. Kevin Peachy, BBC News.
Well, about 1,000 NHS patients will have their energy bills paid on prescription this winter in an expansion of a trial scheme. A pilot scheme in Gloucestershire helped people who have health conditions that get worse in the cold and is judged to have produced such good results that it'll be brought in Aberdeenshire and Teesside. Coletta Smith has the details.
My joints ache like there's no tomorrow. My bones feel like hot pokers. And I tend to end up either bedridden or in the past I have ended up in hospital a few times with pneumonia, flu, pleurisy.
With arthritis and a serious lung condition, Michelle and her young teenage girls usually dread the winter. But not last year, because the NHS paid the entirety of her energy bill.
It's mind-blowing how much of a difference it does make. It makes you happier, you're a bit healthier, you're not as in pain, so you're not snappy as much, or, you know, you're not stuck in beds.
There are millions of people with cardiovascular and respiratory conditions that are made worse by living in a cold home.
Matt was the brains behind this pilot project, but it's the health service who made the decisions about who qualified.
So it's for people with the right health condition who can't afford the heating they need to stay well and warm and well at home. For the health service, they were saying this was having a benefit much more quickly than the pills and potions they normally have to give out. So it was days, not weeks or months.
Despite energy bills being more expensive this year and health budgets being stretched, NHS Gloucestershire have decided to expand the project to 5 times as many people. And Tees Valley and Aberdeen have opted in too, to see if it can work on a bigger scale.
The reason this pilot scheme has worked so well here is that they've had a willing GP who knows people's health conditions working in this surgery alongside social prescribers and people who visit homes regularly and know people's financial conditions. They're therefore able to marry those two things up together and find the people that qualify under both criteria.
Do you want to just tell me about your cough that you've had?
Dr LaRue says this project wasn't an extra pressure on him as a GP.
It's going to save work because actually hopefully going to be keeping patients fitter and well over the winter and stop them getting sick. So I think it's actually saving the money for other services.
Michelle's hoping everyone can feel warm and well this winter.
If everybody could have the help that I was fortunate enough to actually experience, I think it would make such a difference in people's lives.
Coletta Smith, BBC News in Gloucestershire.
And as energy bills rise, there are money-saving tips in our online article, Winter Weather, Keeping Costs Down When It's Cold. You can find that article on the website with the usual address there. The Manston Migrant Processing Centre, a holding site for people who arrive in the UK on small boats, is now cleared, says the Home Office. Thousands of migrants had been placed in tents at the former military airfield in Kent during the autumn, leading to overcrowding and outbreaks of disease. Well, let's find out more from our home editor, Mark Easton. So what's happened here? How has it all happened, Mark?
Well, in a way, this is how Manston should work. It is supposed to be a processing centre where migrants arriving, many of them, of course, in small boats across the Channel, would be taken perhaps just for a couple of hours, at most legally 24 hours, except in exceptional circumstances when it's 5 days. But that's not, of course, the way Manston has been operating. The asylum system has been gridlocked. Everything's backed up, essentially. And so we have seen a few months ago, as you say, 4,000 migrants there living for weeks on end. Some families sleeping on mats. So that's not what's supposed to happen. Actually, they've had a break in the weather. The weather is too poor, frankly, for people to cross the Channel. So there's been another week more than a week without any migrants crossing. As a result, they've been able to draw breath, move all those people in Manston, we're told, on probably to hotel accommodation. But it's not the end of Manston. Once we start seeing more people arriving across the Channel, it will start getting busy again.
All right, Mark, thank you for now. Mark Easton. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has told business leaders that the days of cheap labour must end to wean the UK off its immigration dependency. In a speech to the Confederation of British Industry, Sir Keir called for a plan to train British workers and move the economy away from its low-pay model. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth is at the CBI conference in Birmingham. Alex, how do you read this? Is this a shift in Labour's approach to immigration in some way?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has really been hardening Labour's approach to immigration for some time, certainly from the position he took when he was standing to be Labour leader, when he advocated freedom of movement. And today he was pretty definitive. As you say, he said the UK had to be weaned off its dependency on immigration. He wasn't going to be drawn on any specific numbers. He said he'd be pragmatic, so when there were shortages in certain sectors, then workers could come in from overseas, but there would be conditions on business, so they had to invest in skills and training for the domestic workforce. Here's a little bit of what the Labour leader had to say.
Our common goal must be to help the British economy off its immigration dependency. The days when low pay and cheap labour are part of the British way on growth must end.
Now, Starmer insisted that his whole party was united behind him in this position. He admitted it was a change party from the Labour Party that it had been before. There will be some in his party who do disagree with his stance. And what is interesting is when you speak to business leaders here at the CBI conference, what they're concerned about are the gaps in the labour market that are happening right now. They say a shortage of people in sectors right across the board is really hampering their ability to grow and therefore hampering that economic growth that Sir Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak have both talked about.
Alex, thank you. Alex Forsyth at the CBI conference. G4S security staff who deliver cash and coins have voted to strike in December. The strike could affect supplies to banks and supermarkets. Meanwhile, the RMT union says it's likely to announce details of more rail strikes later today. The union has accused train operators and Network Rail of refusing to make an offer to end the long-running dispute about pay, jobs and working conditions. Train companies have urged the union to stay at the negotiating table. The number of people known to have been killed in yesterday's earthquake in Indonesia has risen sharply to nearly 270. It comes as rescue workers on the island of Java spent the night searching through rubble for survivors. The quake struck the west of the island near the town of Cianjur, a densely populated area prone to landslides with many poorly built houses. Our correspondent Valdia Baraputri sent us this report.
Rescue workers remind people not to get too close to a ruin of a house. They are trying to evacuate a body of a 28-year-old man trapped in concrete after a 3-floor house collapsed to the ground. There were 5 people at the time, but the others survived.
The other people were on the highest floor. They managed to be rescued. My brother-in-law was on the first floor. The ruins fell on him.
The government estimated that most victims are children because of the number of boarding schools in the area that have been destroyed. Meanwhile, many destroyed houses are left by the owners who took refuge in makeshift tents.
The closer to the epicenter of the earthquake, the more visible the damage, some beyond repair. People are too afraid to go back to their houses. Well, as you can see, the slanted floors are very prone to collapsing, even with the smallest aftershock.
151 people are still missing, many trapped under a landslide triggered by the earthquake.
As for the victims who are still buried in the rubble, I have ordered that the search for victims and their evacuation must be prioritised.
The Indonesian Geophysical Agency has learned that the earthquake is once in 20-year event. For hundreds of injured people at the hospital, the effect could last a lifetime. Valdia Baraputri, BBC News, Cianjur.
Nottinghamshire police have said in the last hour that a woman who was seriously injured in an arson attack, which killed her 2 children, has died. The woman was being treated in hospital after the fire at a flat in Nottingham on Sunday morning. Her daughters, who were aged 1 and 3, died. A man was arrested on Sunday night on suspicion of murder. Most of the outstanding schools in England, which have been inspected by Ofsted since 2020, have been downgraded. Some of the schools hadn't been looked at for 15 years. With all the details, here's our education editor, Branwyn Jeffries.
Parents rely on school inspections. Ofsted grades are meant to be a guide to standards. the top grade in England is outstanding. For many years, outstanding schools weren't inspected. The government said it was only needed if concerns were raised. Now, Ofsted has been allowed to revisit, and so far, 80% overall are down from outstanding, mainly to good. 17% have been told they require improvement. 4% of them have gone to the bottom grade of inadequate.
Many parents have noticed a bit of a gap between what's said in a 13 or 14-year-old inspection report and what they see in front of them. And many parents have been concerned about that. I think that's part of why pressure built up to scrap the exemption. I think it's also important to say, well, parents, governors may well notice and recognise some slippage in a school. Sometimes the things that can lead a school to be judged inadequate, such as for safeguarding, for example, may be things that are only visible to a handful of children and their families. They may not be visible to everybody involved with the school.
Ofsted said this shows the value of inspections, but the biggest education union thinks otherwise. It said the current inspections made little positive difference. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
The time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Many energy firms are failing vulnerable customers, says the regulator Ofgem, as people face an expensive winter. It says 17 firms must improve.
Hi, we're from the New York Times. I believe you used to work for Harvey Weinstein.
Coming up, the new film about the New York Times investigation that exposed the film producer Harvey Weinstein. We speak to those journalists and the actors who play them.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, the drama at the Qatar World Cup continues. Denmark are in action, and later the holders France get their campaign underway against Australia.
Now, there's been high drama in Doha today on day 3 of the World Cup, as one of the tournament favourites, Argentina, were beaten 2-1 by Saudi Arabia. The shock result ends Argentina's 36-match unbeaten run. Well, in a few moments, we'll be live at the England training ground after their victory last night against Iran. But first, let's head to our correspondent, John Watson, who is in Doha this lunchtime for us. John.
Yes, afternoon, Jane. The biggest shock of this World Cup so far. Saudi Arabia, a team ranked well below their opponents, who of course have the great Lionel Messi in their side. It's hard to overstate just how big an upset this really is. As Andy Swiss now reports.
On football's biggest stage, 1 to Argentina and out.
Yes, what a moment for Saudi Arabia, and it means that Argentina now have it all to do if they're to progress from their group, and if Lionel Messi is to win the World Cup in what could be his last ever tournament for his country. I can tell you there were more than a few cheers from our Saudi broadcasting colleagues who are a couple of studios down when those goals went in, just as there were when that result was confirmed, with many fans watching in the Saudi fan park, a short walk from where I'm broadcasting from. It feels, Jane, as if this World Cup has just sparked into life.
John, thank you very much. John Watson there in Doha. Well, let me also just tell you about the viewing figures, because nearly 9.5 million people watched Wales play the USA. That was on ITV last night. That compares to an average audience of nearly 7.5 million who watched England play Iran. England's World Cup opener was also streamed a record 8 million times on BBC iPlayer and BBC Sport Online, and that makes it the largest live-streamed event on the BBC over a 24-hour period. Well, attention, of course, turning to England and Wales's next matches. They are on Friday, and England are in training today in the run-up to their match against the US. Let's head to our man Alex Howell, who is at England's training ground. What's your assessment of the mood there, Alex?
So England were back in training today, and it was more of a recovery day
for those players who started the match and played so well against Iran yesterday. It was a session for the non-starters and the players who didn't get off the bench, but there will be some concern for Leicester City's James Maddison, who didn't train again and hasn't done since the first day they landed here. But the mood is good. The players came through the mix zone yesterday. They were very, very happy. I spoke to Chelsea's Mason Mount and West Ham's Declan Rice, and they were telling me how happy they were with the performance, and the only thing they could disagree is that they wish they didn't make the errors and that they didn't concede those 2 goals, and that's a message that came from England manager Gareth Southgate as well, and I think we'll hear that throughout the week as we speak to the players gearing up to that game on Friday, because Gareth Southgate knows just how ruthless tournament football can be and wants to avoid any mistakes.
Alex, thank you. Alex Howell. Well, when Jack Grealish scored his 6th goal for England, it was a special moment for 12-year-old Manchester City fan Finlay. The pair met last week after Finlay, who has cerebral palsy, wrote a letter to the England star, whose sister Holly also has the condition. When they met, Jack promised Finlay...
I was jumping around. I was trying to jump.
And then he did the celebration that you'd asked for. When you saw him do it, the fact that he'd remembered and he'd done what you are, that must have been... What do you think?
At first, I thought that he wouldn't remember, but then when he did it, I was just like, oh my God, he's done the work! He's done the work! I love it.
Oh, that's lovely. Now, the King is hosting his first state visit as monarch as he welcomes South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa to the UK. Mr Ramaphosa will address both Houses of Parliament later and be a guest at a Buckingham Palace banquet. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell is at Buckingham Palace and talk us through the day's event, Sarah.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, I mean, as Prince of Wales, the King was involved in many a state visit over the years, but as you say, this is his first as monarch. He and the Queen Consort Camilla welcomed President Ramaphosa at Horse Guards. The King, as is tradition, inspected the guards, the Guard of Honour with the President, and then they left via carriage, spectacular procession down the Mall in the glorious sunshine of this beautiful autumn day. Mr Ramaphosa will then has a private lunch now with the King. He's got a busy schedule over the next day or so. He'll be visiting Westminster Abbey. He'll be addressing the MPs and the Houses of Parliament. And then this evening there is the state banquet when Britain literally gets out the best china for the foreign visiting leader. What's this all about? Well, it's about developing links. It's about economic links. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said earlier today it's about turbocharging economic links. So it's about pomp and pageantry and also about money. Back to you.
Thank you, Sarah Campbell. 5 years ago, an investigation by the New York Times into one of the most powerful film producers in the world, Harvey Weinstein, helped the Me Too movement spread globally. Weinstein is now serving 23 years in prison, convicted of rape and sexual assault. Now a new film depicts the painstaking work by 2 journalists at the newspaper and the bravery of the abuse survivors who spoke to them. Our entertainment correspondent Lizo Mazimba has been talking to the journalists who broke the story and the actors who play them in the film.
Hi. We're from the New York Times. I believe you used to work for Harvey Weinstein?
It was just over 5 years ago that the newspaper published its groundbreaking story. It didn't just affect the cinema industry, it reverberated around the world. The 2 journalists are played by Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan. I asked them how much responsibility they felt telling a story like this one.
A huge amount of responsibility towards the subjects of the film and towards, you know, everyone who contributed to the original story, a lot of whom are portrayed in the film.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. You know, we felt this enormous responsibility to tell the story conscientiously, and I think we felt like we were in really good hands from the top down.
In your previous stories, how did you persuade women to tell you what had happened to them?
A case I made was, I can't change what happened to you in the past, but together we may be able to help protect other people.
Rather than Weinstein, who denies sexual assault, the movie's more about the individuals who spoke out.
What is it exactly that we're looking at here?
We're looking at extreme sexual harassment in the workplace.
The two journalists who first broke the story hoped it would make an impact, but they never imagined how huge that impact would be.
Women all over the world start coming forward, and we're looking at it going, oh my God, the stakes are even higher than we knew, and we thought we had understood this story.
But we certainly never could have predicted that we would be part of a story that helped kind of ignite change at this level. And it's been, listen, it's been the gift of a lifetime to be part of that.
Harvey's just disputed landings 8 to 12. We have to have corroboration. 8 to 12 settlements has to be backed up.
Is the one word that sums up how you feel about being part of this?
I think gratitude.
Yeah, gratitude, and I think that's been, you know, overwhelming to experience at the screenings that we've had so far of the film, where the real survivors have been in attendance. The gratitude to them from everyone has been overwhelming.
It's also a story about the power of journalism, but of course, at its heart are the women who spoke out.
The only way these women are going to go on the record
is if they all jump together.
We're all here, Harvey.
Who have you talked to?
For a story that changed the world. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
Now, NASA's Artemis space capsule Orion has reached the moon 5 days after leaving Earth. The unmanned spacecraft sent back these spectacular images, which it took as it flew 80 miles from the lunar surface on the far side of the moon. And could electricity be beamed from space to power millions of homes? The European Space Agency will shortly consider funding a study into huge space solar farms to see whether they could work and so help with energy shortages. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh explains how it could work.
It looks like science fiction. Imagine robots building vast solar arrays to capture the sun's power. Its energy converted into microwaves and beamed to Earth, then collected by antennas over a huge area and turned into electricity.
It's not science fiction, that it's not just something on paper or in the lab, that it's ready to be deployed at a small scale. And of course the challenge with applying this to space-based solar power is extending that scale and that power by a dramatic amount. And that will take some time. It's a huge challenge, of course.
It's a challenge these scientists are taking up here in Munich. In an experiment at the aerospace firm Airbus, 2 kilowatts of power were collected from solar panels and sent wirelessly from this transmitter to a receiver at the other end of the room. And that electricity lights up a model city. There's a long way to go from this small demonstration here to sending back solar energy from space. 1 million times more power needs to be transmitted, and it's got to be sent 1 million times further. But the engineers here think it could be done.
If the energy satellite concept were successfully developed, that would collect solar energy 24 hours a day.
Scientists have wanted to do this for decades, because unlike solar energy on the ground, which is interrupted by night time and clouds, it generates power around the clock.
Ignition. Liftoff.
It's only now it might become cost-effective, because rockets can be used over and over again.
If you could do it from space, and I'm saying if you could, because we are not yet there, then this would be absolutely fantastic. Solar-based power from space could really help enormously to address our energy shortages and our energy problem, which is about to come in the next decades.
The US, China and the UK have their own research programs. As energy prices soar and the destructive impacts of climate change are being felt, the pressure for the entire world to develop a new, reliable source of clean energy is greater than ever. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Munich.
And that takes us to a look at the weather prospects. Ben Rich has joined me. Hello.
Hello, Jane. Thank you. Good afternoon. For most of us, it is a little bit drier out there than it was this time yesterday. That said, there are some showers. We've had quite a few across the southwest of England so far today. Conversely, look at that blue sky overhead in Liverpool. A much drier, brighter day. However, the satellite picture shows this big stream of cloud across the Atlantic. There is more wind and rain to come through the week, and some speckled shower clouds to take us through the rest of today. Showers across parts of West Wales, southwest England, the Channel Islands, and actually some quite heavy rain moving across the northeast of Scotland and into Orkney. But other areas, aside from the odd shower, seeing some spells of sunshine. Temperatures north to south, 6 to 11 degrees. That's about where we should be at this time of year. Now tonight, initially, it'll be largely dry. Some fog could develop across central and southern parts of Scotland. But then we see this band of very heavy rain pushing in across the southwest of England into Wales through the early hours. Some really torrential downpours embedded within this, with some squally gusty winds. That might wake you up through the early hours. Also turning pretty wet across Northern Ireland. The lowest of the temperatures further north and east parts of Scotland, northern England getting close to or maybe a touch below freezing. So some fog patches here to start tomorrow morning. Here comes our band of rain. It'll push its way northeastwards, but then become quite slow moving across Scotland. If you look closely, you may see some winteriness mixing in over the very highest ground. Behind that, sunny spells and blustery showers, wind gusts around Irish Sea coast and through the English Channel of 40, 50, maybe close to 60 miles per hour. Temperatures, well, about where they are today, maybe a notch higher, 8 to 12 degrees. And as we look ahead to Thursday, well, here comes yet another frontal system hurtling in from the Atlantic. So again, we'll see some heavy rain, particularly across western areas. Certainly first thing, that rain taking its time to push towards the east. It will again be really quite windy around some western and southern coasts. But it does start to feel just a touch milder. 9 degrees for Aberdeen, 14 degrees for London. Now, as we head to Friday, this little area of high pressure here, see the bump in the isobars? That is a ridge which is going to kill off some of the showers. So Friday, a slightly drier, brighter day. But then another frontal system approaches for the weekend. And as that squeezes in, well, we get a surge of mild air from the south. So temperatures by day and by night for the weekend will be a little bit higher. It will feel milder, but there will still be some wind and rain at times. Jane.
All right, Ben, thank you very much, Ben Rich. And that is it from the News at 1 for today. On BBC One now, we join our news teams wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.